Good morning, everyone. To officially start today's session, let us welcome the Director of the English as an International Language Program, Assistant Professor Dr. Ponpimon Sukawati, for her opening message.
Okay, first of all, I need to excuse if the audience hear my dog barking because this is the work from home period and I can't do anything. So welcome everyone to the EIL Webinar Series II, organized by the English as an International Language Program, Chulalongkorn University. Well, to begin with, I'd like to thank the honorable speakers for contributing your time to be the panel in this academic dialogue. And thanks to the audience for starting your day, especially for people who live in Thailand time zone, to be with us. Well, the talk today would be in a casual manner. Well, this is just because we are all friends and colleagues in academia, and the invited scholars today are ready to share what they know to public. From now on, we are going to learn and share with the invited speakers, invited experts on the topic of writing. We have Kristen Feak from the University of Michigan and Dr. Lisa Russell-Pinson from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, who will share their global perspectives. And we have Professor Dr. Budsaba Kanoksilapatham from Silpakorn University to share the local view. Well, let's enjoy that dialogue entitled Demystifying Academic and Professional Writing, Research Perspectives on Genres, Moods, and Processes. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Ponpimon, for the wonderful message. Once again, welcome to the third installment of the EIL Webinar Series titled Demystifying Academic and Professional Writing, Research Perspectives on Genre, Mood, and Processes. Writing plays an important role in both academic and industry settings. In this session, we are honored to have 3 experts with us who will share their works in writing. This session is formatted in 3 different parts. For the first part, we're going to talk about different ways in understanding writing based on research on mood analysis. And our first speaker will walk us through in this session. Our first speaker is currently an Associate Fellow in Literature and Western Foreign Languages, Bureau of Fine Arts, the Royal Society of Thailand, and also a Professor of English at the Faculty of Management Science, Silpakorn University. She received her PhD in Linguistics, concentrating on applied linguistics from Georgetown University in the US. She has been actively engaged in academic activities, including research projects and articles, textbooks, lectures and talks, and keynote speeches, both delivered internationally and nationally. Due to her distinguished contribution and dedication to the field, she received the award of the TRF Senior Research Scholar in English in 2015. In 2020, she was awarded of Distinguished Researcher of Silpakorn University. Both of the awards were presented to her by Her Royal Highness Princess Mahachakrisiriantorn in 2016 and 2020, respectively. Everyone, let us welcome Professor Dr. Budsaba Kanoksilapatham.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning to the audience and good evening to my 2 friends, Christine and Lisa, who agreed to be on my forum, okay, on our forum actually. Okay, so actually I need to share the screen, so I'll see you in a bit then, right? Okay. Right. Okay, everyone can see my screen now. Well, actually, I'm not going to focus on my talk on local or global because we treat it as something international in a sense. And the reason I would be the first one to start because my talk will be more or less theoretical than the others. So just to make sure that you guys here can stay on track and getting to know what genre means to us and to you all as well. Okay. Well, this is the outline of my talk, and I realized that I have to rush through things. So if I have to skip some here and somehow, please apologize. Accept my apologies because I just want to stay. I will stop my talk at 9:39, just to leave room for the others to talk, okay? So the first one I need to go through is discourse and genre traditions. Right? I think the word genre, has been quite a big mess here, especially in Thailand. Well, first of all, I would say that genre analysis or move analysis later on is an approach to discourse analysis. And actually, when we say it's a discourse analysis, there are other competing models as well. And that's why the word genre itself, is considered differently by different scholars around the world. And I think, Hyon in 1996 put it very nicely that there are altogether 3 distinct traditions in genre analysis. Well, as you can see here, this one clearly shows that the first one, the word genre, according to the systemic functional linguists in Australia, they have their own definition of what's a genre, right? And the second one in North American rhetoric studies, they have their own way of saying what a genre is as well. But today, the center of my focus, presentation today is on ESP, okay? Now, so let's focus on ESP tradition and genre types. I know that some of the audience here might not be familiar with this one. That's why I want to lay a ground framework for this so that the other presenters can build on, okay? Now, according to Swells, he says that there are 3 types of genre. One is academic, another one is professional, and the last one is occluded. I think in Thailand, maybe this one is really not mentioned very often, but somehow you will realize that actually these 3 types of genre are really close to us. Well, let's start with academic genres. I think the picture is quite close to what he is right now, even though I haven't seen him for over a decade, but I know he's still active and generous, very generous. Well, he's the one, the doyen of research article genre. And you can see in the middle that research article is a big genre. It's a cluster containing a number of subgenres. Okay. Now, the next one is professional genre led by Badia, and he wrote a book in 1993, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with his work. Now, occluded genre, according to Swell, he said this is the genre which is not in public, and that's why it's quite confidential in a sense. And these are some examples of occluded genre, like CV, job applications, bio statements, and submission letters. Well, as I said, the focus of my talk today is not going to be on occluded genre or professional genres, but I think people should be aware that actually there are many genres around us. You might not be aware of that. For example, what genre is this? These 2 letters are quite similar, right? And of course, this belongs to application letters genre, which is one of the occluded genres there. The second one, well, I won't have time to go through this. This is an example of recruitment ads, and this is considered professional genre, okay? And the last one, which is quite cute, and they are sales promotion ads, right? And they're also professional genres. Again, as I said, my talk is not going to be on that, but it's going to be on academic genre. Well, in order to appreciate, the background and why we are here today. So the first one, we'll talk about historical development of ESP. Well, I think there are 3 self-sufficient stages, and I think we are now into the stage 3. But let's appreciate what stage 1 has offered to us then. In stage 1, the scholars in this field focusing on linguistic features, right? In, for example, research article genre. At that time, the questions that emerged, for example, what are the tenses that used in particular parts of research articles? For example, why did they use present tense in certain parts of introduction of research articles? And I think this is a key point to start with, because we try to make the distinction between grammatical features in general English and also grammatical features in academic discourse. We learn at this stage that, for example, present tense doesn't have to do much with the timeline anymore, but actually present tense in academic research article connotates or conveys the message that that proposition is quite established and you don't have to argue because it's all accepted and acknowledged. And this is something that scholars in academic genres need to be aware of, right? Okay, well, after this stage, there are a lot of studies focusing on linguistic features like past tense, passive voice, or even extra voice construction. Now we be beyond that point now, because In stage 2, Swales wrote a book, and this is the book that he, the last one on particular on genre analysis in 2004. The focus shifts now to identifying the structure or organization or pattern of academic and professional genres, right? So this book gave me provide me an impetus for my dissertation, and that's why I feel obliged to dedicate all that I have opportunities to this particular figure of John Swales, really. Right. Basically, this is what we see very often whenever we talk about genre analysis, right? This is the framework that he introduced in 1990. And after a lot of work done on particular genre, he modified his framework. And this is the one that full-fledged or fully developed in 2004. But in a nutshell, what can you see here, right? According to this, these 4 pictures or the diagrams here, we know that this genre can be demystified into moves and steps. Now, what does it mean, a move then? A move means or refers to a chunk of text that has a communicative function. For example, move 1 is establishing a territory, means to say that how important your study is. And then you identify possibly a gap, and then you're trying to niche the gap by addressing the study that, okay, this is one of the ways to address the gap. But then after a lot of work has been done in this study, then he modified his framework. But you see that basically it is the same. It has moves and it has a number of steps. So the steps are the subunits of the move in order to supplement or strengthen how a move can accomplish its communicative function. Again, you can see some certain keywords here like obligatory or optional. These refer to the frequency of the occurrence of the steps or moves here. Now you can see that, well, this is a pattern. This is a structure. And because of it being a structure or pattern, it allows people to take away from this and, create their own research article genre as well, or their research articles. And I am one of the people who greatly benefit from this. Without this framework, I don't think I would be able to finish my dissertation. Without this, I won't be able to write so many articles and be promoted as a professor as I am nowadays. So again, tribute to my professor, right? Okay, now based on this, then you might notice that, right? We're starting from move analysis, and that's why genre analysis and move analysis are interchangeably used. And we use the word structure, organization, or pattern to refer to the same concept of move structure. Now, I think it's very charming because when he created this framework, there are 2 things going on. One is a top-down approach, because he looked at the whole text as a whole and he demystified into moves and steps. But that's not it, because he also integrates the bottom-up approach. And that's very crucial because the moves and steps cannot be justifiably exist without the evidence from the linguistic features, that these linguistic features co-occur in such a way to achieve a particular communicative function. So neat and nice as it is, right? And that's why I think it is very unfortunate for all of us here to know about genre analysis without getting hands-on experience. As you can see that I described earlier that John Swales focused on research article introductions. But again, as you may be well aware that introductions might like 1.5 pages at least, and that's why it might not be manageable in this forum. So I'm going to show 2 texts, 2 examples that are taken from authentic ones without any modification. And I would ask you, the first question. The texts you're seeing, are they academic or are they professional? I'm sorry, I have my 2 shipping birds and they thought that I was talking to them. That's why they're shipping back to me. I couldn't stop my birds, not my dogs either. Sorry for that. Number 2, after all, have you read the text then? What genre is it then? And how you know that it's such a genre? So these are the 3 questions that I would like you to focus on. So here we are. Of course, during this pandemic outbreak, we can't do anything, just highlighted the fact that we are still in trend and along with the paradigm. So this is the text, right? Of course, if I want to answer my question, does this one look academic or professional? Well, I hope the answer is academic. right? This is text 1. And what genre is this? I'm sure that if you are PhD students, you are struggling with this one and you want to accomplish one day, right? And so the answer is this is an abstract genre taken from international journal and with high impact factors or high citations numbers as well. So text 2, again, is on COVID, right? And it's a bit shorter, but again, the same genre and the same topic, right? Now, what do we do when we do move analysis then? Just note in the 3 minutes talk. We can say that let's demystify the text 1, right? And I highlighted parts of the text into different colors. Now, different colors for me means what? These chunks of text are performing different communicative functions, right? So the first one in blue, the second one in red, the third one in green, the fourth one in orange, and the last one in black. These colors means that these are moves and different moves here. The first move, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth move. Are they the same communicative function? Of course not. Look at the text, in blue then, right? With the key keywords highlighted. So this sentence is at the beginning, and clearly is a background. It provides the background why the study is needed. The second one with the keywords here in this study we address. So it talks about the purpose. And in green, the survey was conducted. That's the methods. The next one, we find that, and we find that it's the result. And the last one, we discussed. So these are the 5 elements, represent the 5 moves, nicely organized into B, PM, background, purpose, methods, results, and discussion, which means that based on this template, on this example, we can walk away and say, now with my project in hand, I will be able to write one abstract, which is decent enough for people to accept it by following the move structure. And always, as I said here, the linguistic features highlighted here, they have some communicative functions. They have to highlight that my study is very important by using the lexical feature of considerable and attention, and by using the present tense to make sure that my study is of interest, of current interest. Also, this move in this study, not other studies, in my study, we addressed blah, blah, blah. Now let's move on to text 2 then. Even though these 2 texts are different, they belong to the same genre of abstract. And as you can see here, they don't share the same identical structure. This one has what? Background, right? Methods, result, and discussion. So you can see that clearly that there is no move of purpose. But that's okay, because sometimes it is embedded under another move, but at least it has a structure. And I'm sure the authors have the reasons not to include or not to exclude certain moves for some reasons there, right? Now, based on this move analysis, you can see how top-down approach and bottom-up approach are working in a particular text. I don't have to mention a wealth of studies or research article genre and subgenres. And we have Christine today, and Christine is a co-editor of ESP. So ESP is the journal that I love and I adore, and it's the first one on my top of my bucket that I want to go there again one day for my publication. Okay, so now let's move on to stage 3. In stage 3, which is our stage right now, people have found that, wait a minute, even though we write research articles, but the research articles generated from different disciplines might not be acting the same way. And that's why the researchers, in this stage, they want to focus on the role of contextual resources in shaping the research articles, right? And this results from complexity of academic and professional genres. And that's why more studies were being conducted in order to address why research articles are not writing exactly the same. And that would be so boring, to write the same way. That's why writing is a creative activity, and it has a lot of beauty in it. Okay. Now, for example, in academic genres, right, we found that there are what we call disciplinary variation across disciplines. And not only that, then, even in the same discipline, the subdisciplines can manifest some variation as well. And these are, triggered by community size, the time periods, the research traditions, and even cultures, which means the language across, the board as well. The same goes through for professional genre, because sometimes it's national level and sometimes it's international levels. Okay, I focus on engineering. This is my study conducted and published in 2015, and of course in ESP. I am very interested in engineering because after I have done biochemistry and other disciplines, I think engineering is quite fascinating, because in engineering, there are many subdisciplines, and they're quite distinct in nature. But I want to pin down exactly what the difference is among these, subgenres of these disciplines. So I focus on 3 disciplines, which are civil engineering, biomedical engineering, and software engineering. And this is what I found, taken directly from, ESP journal. So the asterisk here means that these are significant differences across the 3 disciplines. Well, one interesting fact that I found is that, move structure is the same across the disciplines. So actually moves are very strong. So for novice researchers like PhD students here, if you have these 3 major moves, you seem to be fine in that track. What matters is the steps then. The way the steps are interacting with each other, it's very interesting. So for example here, right? The movement step 1 claiming centrality, which seems to be very strong and stable. But somehow we found that in civil engineering, people didn't mention this move or this step that much. Why? And the reason that I offer is that because civil engineering is the oldest of the 3. And that's why we know that we have buildings, we have bridges, we have irrigation dams because of the work of these civil engineers. That's why there is no need to mention it anymore. Or reviewing previous studies, this is interesting because this move was found very least in software engineering. And the reason they offer, because this is a very fast moving field, and that's why they want to move the field forward in order to beat the market. Otherwise, they don't have any chance to sell their applications. So these are the reasons that I think it's very fascinating that even though the move structure prevails, some variations exist. And that's exactly the beauty of writing research articles in your own disciplines, right? So steps are the ones, representing distinguishing features. I'm going to move on fast now because I don't have only 5 minutes left. Right. So this slide, these are the 2 studies I mentioned. One is by a Chinese student. This is her PhD, and another one by a Vietnamese student. And look at this then. The contextual resources have been integrated from many domains, including disciplines, research traditions, and also publication times. So I think it's interesting to show you that research articles genre is not static. It's very dynamic, and it's still evolving, especially when ICT kicks in. I'm sure that the impacts will be quite substantial. That would be interesting for us to see what's going to happen to our research article genre in the next 5 or 10 years. Now, some methodological features, I would go very quickly then. So this is something that we have to understand, that when you do move analysis, when I said there are typical 4 sections like IMRD, but you know what? One size fits all doesn't exist, because people might not use the term, the label methods. They might want to say methods and results in certain disciplines, or they might say results and discussions in certain disciplines. So this is one thing that move analysts need to bear in mind, that they need to find a ground that they can be firm about what they are doing and make sure that comparison could be justifiably made. Okay. The second one, when we say top-down and bottom-up approaches, many move and studies right now focus on either top-down and some focus on even bottom-up. To me, I prefer to combine. But again, combination of these 2 approaches can result into a big, can of worms as well. Why? Because when we say linguistic feature, like that clause, that's a huge linguistic feature. If you follow Dr. Biber's study, you say that clause can be divided into many, many types of clauses. For example, that clause preceded by a cognitive verb, for example. And this is why we have to be aware that when you say linguistic features, at what level, how generic and how specific they are, right? Okay, for example, unit of analysis. Swells never said that a move has to be a sentence. And based on my dissertation, a move can be at a phrase level as well. Let's take a look at this sentence, right? It says, the findings show that the students have become more motivated in English learning, suggesting that. Well, if you are a very strict move analyst and say, oh, this sentence has two moves. The first one, result. And the second one, blah, 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 sections, it can be considered as a commenting move, right? So that's why this is a blur area. So for move analyst, you need to be consistent. You want to use sentence as a unit, then prove it and give some reason to support that. If not, then it can be broken down into the phrase level or a clause level as well. And this will have an impact on the coding styles, especially for comparison purposes. Now, the move step and phenomena, right? The frequency. In my article 2015, because it was mentioned only obligatory and optional, and I feel a bit, that this distinction might not be enough. So I add the third category, like compulsory or obligatory, or conventional and optional. And I think it gives freedom for novice researchers to see that there are three distinctions here, and which one is, then it means you have to use them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to communicate. The length, you can see that even one single move can be different in size. And this is the beauty that added to it, because it's up to the author. If you want to highlight your results, you can say more in the abstract. If your results are not that great, you might want to highlight more of your methodology. So I think, this framework has, a high level of flexibility that you can comfortably, fit your study in, okay? Sequence and type and cycle. This, found very often, particularly in the discussion section, which, non-native speakers found this part very challenging to me too, honestly, right? Because this discussion section has a lot of cycles, right? And the cycles, for example, results followed by commenting, like comparison, this is called a one cycle. Oh, sorry, this is a move sequence. But this move sequence can recur. Why? Because usually one study has more than one result. And that's why this is called a cycle. And therefore, when you find this, you need to report that in your analysis as well, that you will find the sequence, and this sequence is cyclical or not. If so, then report it. Cyclical, cyclicality, and cyclicity. Okay, now this is a burning question. When the Thai students ask me, Ajahn, how many articles I should include? You will not, there is no definite answer, because it depends on the scope and the scale, right? And it depends on the size of the genre as well. And that's why there is no definite answer. But you need to justify how you come up with this corpus, how representative it is. For example, if you deal with newspaper, you have to justify that, oh, I chose this newspaper because it has the highest circulation number. Okay, I can buy that, right? So in that case, if you want to focus on one genre, the researcher needs to be well familiar with that genre in order to start doing move analysis. Right. Next, this is the one that John never mentioned, but I found it's very fascinating, and it strengthens, the framework a lot. Because at one point in time, and I think some people will say that, well, move analysis is very subjective. Yeah, in a sense, but as I said, the subjectivity can be complemented by the linguistic features, right? And that's why they are complementary in a sense. But still, for example, BB working on engineering, I don't look like an engineer. And that's why people might say, oh, come on, what are you doing here? And that's why in that case, the expertise needs to be integrated by having intercoder reliability analysis. And people ask them, Ajahn, how many articles should I should go through in this process? I didn't find out this answer until I asked this question to my Georgetown professor, and the lady, my professor, said about 10%. And I think that makes sense. I didn't try to make this, the rule, but it's just to give you some guideline how to approach, intercoder reliability. And here it is, the conclusion, right? People keep asking me, Ajahn, what are the applications of move analysis? I have to say, from my heart, that when Swales created this framework in 1981, he realized that non-native speakers suffer so much from writing research articles in English. And I think that's the same case here. We have great doctors in Thailand who are doing very well with COVID-19, and they would like to publish their work. However, they need something to move, the work forward by. If they know the structure, they can publish in in just a nick of time, right? So this is the books to show you that based on move analysis, they turn into a book. And of course, the author is here with us today. So this is a meet and greet the author, right? Besides that, then we know that we understand how research articles are written. I struggled before when I was a student at Georgetown. And then one day I found Swell's framework in the library. I changed my topic. And I didn't regret a bit that I changed my topic of my dissertation from blah, blah, blah to move analysis, right? So we now know that, well, everything around us is the genre. And if we can't find the structure, we can teach our students. And then, of course, the students can modify the framework to fit their own research. And isn't that beautiful? I think it's great. Okay. I'm sure that there will be a session for Q&A. So as I said, for those who are PhD students, enjoy your academic journey. We are here to help you. Good luck and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Budsaba, for laying a very nuanced theoretical and methodological background in doing research in writing. I actually like how Professor Budsaba stressed that, the findings from research on moves are not intended to impose what writing should be, and that writing is static. Rather, it is a dynamic process, and and each genre has its own particular features that people should be made aware of. And I think that's a very clear message that those students who are struggling with their writing, you don't have to fully pattern it, but you have to understand that genre to produce the correct way of, writing it. So I think that was a very wonderful message, Shachan. Thank you so much. I think the next author needs no introduction because most of graduate students have read her book, and I myself have used it a lot when I was doing my master's. And let me formally introduce her. Our next speaker is a faculty member at the English Language Institute at the University of Michigan, where she's the lead lecturer for dissertation writing and writing for publication courses. She is co-author with Professor John Swales of Academic Writing for Graduate Students and the English in Today's Research World book series focused on the writing of research genres and subgenres. In addition to teaching and textbook writing, she also serves as a co-editor of ESP, an international peer-reviewed journal focusing on topics relevant to the teaching and learning of discourse for specific communities. Her current research interests include academic writing in education, medicine, and business, writing for publication, needs of scholars in developing countries, and the development of effective academic writing curricula. Let us all welcome Christine Feak.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction. I always sound so much more accomplished than I think I am when I hear people do an intro for me. So thank you very much, Joey. That was very nice. Yeah, so I have some slides I'm going to share with everybody. So just give me a moment to get those set up. Please do put some questions in. Have questions along the way, and hopefully all of us can be monitoring and waiting for my screen share to come out. We can all be monitoring the chat then. So, okay. As usual, technology is not my friend at the moment. So I'm going to stop for a second and start this again because it worked about a half an hour ago. So let me try this again. And let's see. How's that? Is it working now? Can everyone see? Yes, yeah. Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to put a timer on also for myself because I could talk for hours on this, and I know I don't have hours. Yeah, so you can see from my title that I'm going to be talking about other genres that we might be focusing on in our academic writing instruction. So one of my real interests is in how we take all this wonderful research, such as what Bibi has done in engineering, and classroom, right? Research is wonderful. Research is really, really important, but we have to find a way for that research to find its way into the classrooms as well in order to offer the best support. So a question that I have often is, okay, what's out there in the research that I need to be attending to? What's going on with my students that I need to be attending to? And how could I merge the two together to be an effective academic writing instructor? So thank you for setting me up so nicely. I don't need to go into a lot of the technical explanations here. So it's like we planned this, even though we didn't really. So I think we're all pretty familiar with the idea of academic writing instruction at the postgraduate or graduate level. I'm going to use graduate most likely because that's what I'm familiar with, but postgraduate, master's and PhD, right? That we know that it's often focused on genres with a research orientation, right? And there's a lot of research out there on article introductions. That's probably the best researched subgenre that is out there in our field. Discussions are also fairly well researched, but not as much as introductions. Titles, a little bit. Abstracts, a lot more than that. But we often think, when we're thinking about teaching academic writing, that we need to focus on research genres. And I think that's great, right? There's so many really wonderful genres that we can talk about and focus on with our students. Usually the dissertation or the thesis sits at the center of that, right? And along with that, we might be looking at proposals or dissertation abstracts and journal articles, of course, because that's your currency. It's like money. You get a publication that's like getting money, right? Conference proposals, abstracts, maybe even manuscript reviews. And I think many of you are familiar with these types of academic writing that we do. And those of us that teach academic writing often will focus on this. And so when we focus on these research-based genres, the students that we teach develop a good research writing toolkit. There's no doubt about that. And I think that's really, really important. Because they also can develop their awareness as a member of their scholarly community, right? When they learn to write for the chemistry community or for the engineering community. This is really, really, really important. It also helps them develop a scholarly identity. That's a whole different issue that I don't have time to go into today. It's very complicated what that really means, but as you write for your community of scholars, you also develop an identity within that community of scholars. And that can come through writing, conference presentations, and so on. And this is super important, there's no doubt. All right, because I teach this myself. Most of my academic writing teaching focuses on those genres. But what if we have graduate students that don't have research to write about? And they want to learn more about academic writing as well. Well, we're kind of stuck here, right? Because if we're going to focus on writing an article for publication, and we have students that aren't doing any research at the moment, they really don't have much to work with here. And so we're expecting perhaps a bit more than what the students are able to do. And I'm thinking here of the new master students and new PhD students in their first semester. I'm not sure what the context is like in Thailand, but at least in the US, master students outnumber PhD students by a lot. And yet our model for teaching academic writing is often still focused more towards the PhD students who will be in a lab, who will be conducting research and so on. There are also master students that do research. There's no doubt. I know many of them myself. I work with them also. But there are some master students in certain programs that are not going to be doing research. They're going to be doing other kinds of academic writing. And this is where the interesting distinction that Bibi brought up earlier of academic, professional, and occluded genres. Sometimes we have students in academia that are actually more interested in writing up genres that fall into the professional side of things than in the academic side. And yet, if we're still focusing on the research side of it, right, what are we doing to support those students in these other programs? And I'll explain who I'm talking about in a moment. So if we think about all the grad students that we might have, and again, I am looking at this from my own US perspective, but I think this may be similar across many different educational contexts, right? We have master's and PhD. Within the master's programs, though, we have students that are in what we call professional programs, right? And these would be students studying in the US, not in other countries. For example, I know law is an undergraduate program. In the US, it's graduate only. You might be studying a law, or it might be a master's in public policy, a master's in public health, a master's in business, MBA, some engineering programs also in the US. Social work also is what we call a professional program in a professional school, where the master's students are more likely to be going into a professional practice of some sort, not necessarily going into academia. And then when I say non-professional, it means your kind of traditional chemistry degree, master's degree or PhD, chemistry, physics, English, linguistics, whatever, right? And students in those other programs, the non-professional programs, might be going into academia, they might not, right? But we do know that those in those other professional schools or programs are less likely to be going into academia than those in a professional school, a traditional master's program. And of course, even with the PhD students, there's no guarantee that they're going into academia anymore either. There's been a big shift in academia where many PhD students may be actually not pursuing an academic career, but they want the PhD anyway to have the credential, right? But they intend to be doing something else. And these needs of the students vary quite a bit. They're not the same by any means. So if we take again those students in the professional programs, and by professional schools, these are master students that I'm talking about, although there are PhD students in those programs, their needs are different. But those in the professional schools and programs might be working on projects, working with clients, writing project reports, and doing lots of other things that are absolutely critical to be a social worker, to be a public health expert, to be, someone in a company, running a division within a company. That's not necessarily what the PhD students are doing, right? So we have to think about these other students as well. And again, this goes back to this idea that this professional academic division, I think is blurring, right? And has been blurring for a while now, right? So we're going to have to rethink a little bit how we are preparing students for their academic writing, right? So the balance still is definitely towards that research writing, but what about the other writing, right? What about those other students? And I'm concerned about these other students because we're redoing our writing curriculum in my department right now. And we are realizing that we are not meeting the needs of the students that are not going into a research-oriented field, right? Or not going to pursue a career in academia, okay? So we need to think about a lot of different things, right? One of these things that we have to think about in our writing instruction is, well, what genres do students need to do now? Right? What do they need right now? Okay. We know even for a PhD student, they're going to write a dissertation, but they're not going to do it in their first semester, right? They're going to write a paper for publication, but they're not going to do it now, right? So this is important for us to consider what is needed now. And also what genres students can do now in order to develop their genre knowledge and academic writing skills, right? So it's what they need to do now, right? What they can do now, right? And those don't always match up. The can do now is really tricky. Again, and I go back our research writing classes for master students that are working with clients and doing project reports. They don't need to do a literature review, let's say. They don't need to write up a methodology necessarily. They're not producing results or discussions, right? And again, I'm not saying those things are not valuable. I've made my career on those things. Those other research writing genres are super important, but the others that students need to do in these other programs can't be ignored. So I think we don't want to just focus only or primarily on the research genres that someone might do or will do sometime in the future, right? I think we have to consider more broadly what we're offering to meet the needs of all of our students when we're teaching academic writing. And I'm going to even include here undergraduates, right? Because some of what I'm talking about with master students is also true for upper level undergraduates who are also maybe working with clients, doing project reports and things like that. So I'm gonna also just go sideways a little bit here. I think it's also important to think about how we talk about genre with our students, right? So how do we translate all that wonderful research that Bibi was talking about earlier, right? And how do we bring that into the classroom? Well, I find increasingly I'm translating the research that's out there into more digestible content for my students also in order to help build their genre knowledge, right? So I like to just define more simply. It may not be the most academic of definitions, so no critique here, I hope. But for the purposes of teaching, it's easier for a student to understand genre as the text we write and read and speak to get something done, right? We want something, right? So we write something, okay? So we want money, we write a funding proposal. We want to go to a conference, we write a proposal to get the money to go to that conference, right? Okay, so I think it's important also to get the idea across that these genres are there to allow us to get something done. These are the things we write, speak, and read in response to an event. Like a conference proposal is out there. The response is a conference, a call for proposals. The response is a conference proposal, right? Also, the text we write, read, and speak to communicate with others. Like a manuscript review is like a conversation between the reviewer, the author, and the editor. It's just not in synchronous time, right? It's asynchronous and in written form, right? So again, to think about how we introduce these concepts to our students so that they're digestible, so that they're accessible, right? And again, we have to be translators here, right? So I just want to get that out there. So one of the goals, I think, too, when we're thinking about how to set up these writing classes, right? If we're going to have a research focus, great. If we're going to have a non-research focus, but still work on genre, right? Our goal for each of those contexts is to help our students build this genre awareness. And that is our competence in relation to when we write, when we don't write. For example, when we don't respond to a call for proposals. I know very well when I should not respond. Not my field, I don't respond, right? What to write about, and to whom, and when, where, and in what manner, right? Okay, these are things that I think, again, that our students can begin to understand regardless of the direction that we're taking with our genre-focused instruction. But what I want to do, though, is turn to some of these other non-research based genres that we actually could focus on in an academic writing class for our students that can give them the tools they need that can also help them with any writing that they would do in the future. So earlier, yeah, the mention was top down and bottom up processing, right? I love for my students to be able to do that, right? Top down, bottom up. I don't want to do the work for them, right? And if we can help them learn how to do that with basic genres that are not research focused, that toolkit is already primed and ready to go when students have a new genre and they need to analyze it and figure out what's going on. Okay, so so what can we do, right? There's a ton of stuff out there. This is just a subset of some of the things that I actually do in a seminar that I do for the business PhD students at my university. And the things that we spend some time on, in addition to research genres, but thinking about a research interest statement, thinking about their CV, getting them started on a teaching philosophy, whether they are going into academia or not. Maybe that's not something that they're really interested in, but maybe a statement of professional practice, right? Where this is where someone who is in social work, let's say, would write a statement about their beliefs about being a social worker, right? What is their philosophy of being a social worker? What is their philosophy of being a nutritionist, let's say, in the School of Public Health, right? And so Also the bio statement, which was mentioned earlier, right? About me, which is another way that we have often described it, an about me kind of text. Joey did a beautiful about me introduction for me. He spoke it, but it was written originally, right? Right. So these are things that we can think about, blogs even, right? And I'm not an expert on blogs, but I know genre, I know move analysis, I know I can help my students with this. I know that I can transfer some of my knowledge over to them, and they can teach me in return, because my younger students know way more about blogging than I do. I don't blog, I won't ever do it most likely, but I've got something to offer and they've got something to offer in return. What's really interesting is that all of these different genres that don't require someone to have research to write up, it doesn't require someone to be out there doing data collection. They also are tied together in the form of a web page or on LinkedIn, or other social networking sites that are out there, right? So it's not like this is a random collection of genres, right? These are genres that can fit together so a student could create a website, let's say, right? So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And we do in this seminar that I teach with the business students, we require them to create a website using the genres that we've worked on in our writing seminar. So I hope my links work. This sometimes is a little bit, unsure for me if it's, oh yes, it works. Awesome. So this is one of my, this is a current student that I have, and she just finished her master's program, and she will be a PhD student, and she's in marine biology, right? And she created this amazing blog that she shared with me the other day, right? I can't do this, or maybe I could do it, I don't know, right? But what's really, really interesting is the creativity in these genres. And the question I have is this academic? Is it not academic, right? Where are we now with our divisions, right? Certainly it sounds academic in some respects, where she talks about specializing in molecular marine biology, studying corals genomics, phylogenomics, right? That's really academic. I have no idea what metabarcoding is, but it's probably not what I think it is, right? But then you've got the playfulness of the over here, I heart coral, I protect coral reefs, a little playfulness, the beautiful picture that she photographed, and it reflects more of who she is than just an academic with a bio. And then of course she's got these awesome images all over. I mean, if anybody wants this link, just let me know and I'll get it in the chat eventually, right? So this is an example of a really, really interesting genre, in my opinion, right? And could this be something that we're actually helping our students prepare in an academic writing class? This is really exciting to be working on. That's one. Another one. Again, we often don't think of bio statements as being public, but they have really become public in recent years. And so here's an example of a student at University of British Columbia. She's part of a lab, the Sensory Perception and Interaction Research Group. I don't quite know everything that they do, but right, even as a master's student, she's been asked to write this bio statement, right? And again, where do students learn how to write these bio statements? What they often do is they go look for another bio statement on the internet, right? They might find one of a faculty member and think that they need to be writing like a faculty member, right? Or they might find one like the previous student, Diana, and think that they need something that's really tiny, right? And a little bit more informal in many respects. But this one's quite different from what we would expect to find, maybe at the end of a journal article, right? But this is certainly a bio statement, very different from the first one, that shows the playfulness and the creativity that was mentioned earlier, right? Great example, I think, and actually all the master students in this lab have these bio statements that we could look at. Some a little bit more playful, some a little more serious, right? But still, when we look at them, we all see that they're bio statements, okay? Right. Yeah, so let me give you another example, right? This is like a super creative way of having a bio where the student doesn't write it themselves, but somebody else writes it, right? But I still recognize this as a bio of sorts, right? It still is a biography, right? They're very different because they're student spotlights, and you can see here, they often have what looks like a title, right? Usually you don't have a title on your bio statement. I don't have my name on the top of my bio statement as a title. It's there as a formality, but there's no title. But these titles serve to give a little glimpse into the student, right? Read the bio, right? And so this is also, I think, a very playful thing that we could possibly do in an academic writing class where a student writes the spotlight on another student, right? And includes an image and includes a little bit more information. And if you're curious what it looks like, right, there are questions that frame it, and it's very conversational, very personal in some respects, in ways that a true bio statement would never be. But very fun nonetheless to think about, right? And you can teach genre using these as well. Any of those bio statements would allow us to teach genre to our students and to talk about moves and to talk about audience purpose and strategy. Let me give you just one more as well, LinkedIn. I was really happy I could find some master students on LinkedIn. This student happens to be from Thailand, I'm pretty sure. Yes, nailed it. I'm so pleased with myself, right? But LinkedIn, now this raises an interesting academic blurring. LinkedIn is for professionals, but a lot of us academics are out there. I don't use my LinkedIn space at all very effectively. I have one just to say I have it. Other academics are using it for one purpose, but a student like Will here is writing up this bio for a very different purpose, right? But it does have the essence of the academic bio on there, but also more of a professional one, right? So these bio statements are becoming very interesting genres to be looking at. And I think because of the variation, it allows us to help us with our teaching of genre and moves and how there is fluidity, right? There's room for creativity and movement, okay? So what's really cool also about this is that the content, if we look at bio statements, is familiar. The students are writing about themselves, as opposed to writing about research that they may know very little about, right? That content problem is a huge issue when I have a first-year master's student who's in my research paper writing class, and they've only begun their program. They don't have anything to write about. They're not familiar with the research in their field. So this is a way for me to at least introduce this concept, right? Take a genre in which you write about yourself, and then the content's not an issue, right? It's really kind of fun, right? So what would the goals be in writing a bio statement? What would we expect to find? Well, Joey gave us a great example already, right? A name of a person, where their affiliation is, what their claim to fame is, what their accomplishments are, that kind of thing. Maybe a little name dropping. I always include that I work with John Swales because you get a lot of mileage when you work with John Swales. You know, it's been great. And so I don't want to hide that. I feel that is really awesome. Not that it makes me better, but it may give an indicator of my alignment within linguistics. If I work with John Swales, I have an alignment there, right? And that's my reason for dropping his name often, right? So we have expectations, and luckily there is research on this, right? And this happens to be research that John Swales did with Chris Tardy, which is kind of cool. I think many of you know Chris Tardy also. Where they were looking at the bio statements of faculty members, and they came up with these moves, right? And as is in keeping with his moves in an article introduction, notice that the moves are always stated as ing verbs, right? You are doing something, right? You're identifying, establishing, highlighting, describing, right? To indicate that these are things that you do, so that the students get in their mind that they are doing something as opposed to dropping content into a template, right? Whereas if you say to someone, give your name, give your institution, give your degree, it's like just dumping content into something, right? Okay, and what we like to do is to get students in the habit of thinking of the genres are being used to accomplish something. The moves allow you to do the work of the genre, okay? Right? Yeah. So here's an example, right? Colors, thank you for setting me up. We have a thing going here without planning. Colors are really useful. So this is a bio statement from a student who has done almost no research at all. She's at the very beginning of her PhD career, right? And so this was part of the work that we did this summer, right? And I think this is a pretty decent bio statement, right? It seems to be following the moves, right? She's identifying, right? My name is, I'm a first-year PhD student, and her affiliation, Ross School of Business. And she doesn't mention University of Michigan because this will be on a University of Michigan webpage, okay? So there's no need to necessarily put that in. Maybe no need to even say that there is a need to put in the Ross School of Business, but she did, right? She gives us her achievements. She's got her BS, right, from Sogong University, and MS from Seoul National University, right? Very nice. In the next move, she's describing her research, but notice she talks about research interests, right? Being very careful, right, to label them as interests because that's where she is at the moment, right? And then there's no move 5 in there, right? But there's this interesting thing that many new students will do, and that is saying what they hope their research will accomplish, right? And that is not something that John Swales and Chris Tardy found in their analysis of the professors that were writing bio statements, but this is something that I see very, very frequently. Is it a new move? I don't know. We'd have to do, a lot of research on this to find out. But it's interesting to think about, right? That maybe when we're looking at a student version of a genre, like a bio statement, right? Maybe we should have an expectation that we have different moves, right? Because they have less stating future goals. I mean, it sounds like a good one to me, but we'd have to explore that a little bit. My position is that it shouldn't be the same, but we could have a discussion on that, right? So it's important to know those moves, right? There's no doubt moves are super important, but in order to know what to put in those moves, students need to have an idea of what they're trying to do ultimately. What are they trying to achieve? What do they want their reader to think after reading that genre of a bio statement, right? Are they trying to connect with collaborators? Are they trying to just look competent, right? Not forget about collaborators. I just want to look competent. Are they trying to appear knowledgeable, to instill confidence in someone else who's looking at their bio? Are they trying to look interesting, cool? Are they trying to impress? Are they trying to reveal alignment with a particular group? Like I said, I like to align myself with John Swales and the genre focused teaching. Or is there something else? And that's where the content is really important. It's not just you've got to dump some stuff into those moves, but think about what that content is, because the community that will read this has expectations, right? And genres are written for and by the community, for each other. And we all have expectations. So what is it that the community expects? Does the community want you to reveal alignment? Maybe that's what you do. If they want you to write in such a way to connect with collaborators, then that would be what you do. But this is where the students can also do a little bit of work. Whether they're working on a bio statement or a research paper, these same issues are the same. These issues are the same. They don't vary, right? But difficulties can arise, particularly with the bio statement, when the author wants one text for multiple goals, right? You have multiple impressions. You want to do all of these things, right? Well, you can't do that in a bio statement. You've got to be very clear about what you're trying to accomplish here. Okay. So that think about, right? I am going to, do I want to, Yeah, I'm going to skip that one, right? Okay, so I'd like y'all just to take a look at this one, and then I'm going to try to wrap up because I am really worried about the time. So please stop me when I need to stop. This is a master's. This was a master's student working with me in the research writing class, and this is what he produced as his first draft that I looked at and gave comments on, right? And I can't see everybody here, but everybody might be thinking, well, that looks pretty good, or that doesn't look pretty good, or I don't know where you're thinking, right? I think it's a great first draft myself. I love first drafts of text. One of the challenges I had with this is I wasn't clear what his goal was. I wasn't really sure what kind of audience he was directing this at. It didn't look like an academic audience to me. Right? Appropriate for a professional audience, right? All I knew is that ultimately the student got feedback that this bio was not appropriate for an academic audience by a group on our campus that he wanted to be a member of, right? And they had to submit a bio statement. He got feedback and they said, this isn't going to work, right? There was a lot of content here that people couldn't process. For example, nobody knew what SK Engineering Construction was, right? It's just a company name. It's not meaningful, right? Also, the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy wasn't meaningful. So there was a lot of content in this bio statement that wasn't useful for readers. They didn't know how to process it. But the moves are there, right? The moves are there to some extent, right? But it doesn't succeed in terms of what the student needed to do for an academic audience, right? Next draft of this though, right, the problematic part in italics, this is what he ultimately wound up submitting. And what you'll notice is that a lot of that detail was just pulled out because it didn't mean anything to anybody, right? But the detail was repackaged as, now the student is a strategist for a leading global infrastructure company. Now that sounds really fancy to me. It sounds way better to me than the name of SK Engineering, which didn't mean a thing to me, but wow, a strategist for a leading, notice the boosting going on there, right? So it's a great genre also for talking about how you boost a claim in your writing, okay? And he's interested in fostering development, right? This sounds really fancy to me. When I read it, I said, yeah, this is it. This is the one that's going to work, right? So again, it's not just the moves, but what are you trying to do and who are you writing to, okay? Definitely a more successful one. This is also another bio. I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but what I really liked is this expression, a little bit too often, lie at the intersection of. I'm getting close to maybe not liking that, but at the moment when I saw this, I thought, awesome, this is great, right? So you can get at the idea of academic phraseology, right? How do people use language to get their points across rather than say, I am interested in, right? Which you could, and that would get the job done. But this gets the job done better, right? In that it's connecting with the audience a little bit more, right? Also at the end, I enjoy collecting novel data. We don't get to use progressive very often in our academic writing, but here's a case where progressive form of the verb works really, really well, right? And then at the end, again, not conventional, reach out to me with a hyperlink, right? So that you could email her. At the end of journal articles, faculty members don't do that. They never say, reach out to me, right? They don't care. Maybe, I don't know why, but they don't want you to reach out to them necessarily. Anyway, I thought this was a great example, right? Of how someone, again, at the beginning of their career is learning about boost, and also something to point out where she described her context as the largest credit shock in the 20th century, right? Which is like, wow, this is really important. She could have just said the Great Depression in the early 1900s, which is fine. But when you frame it as the largest credit shock, in the 20th century. You're getting into this idea that you need to be able to boost your claims, right? That you need to highlight importance and relevance in what you're doing. So these bio statements are so rich with this kind of opportunity for us, right? And we can talk about audience and purpose and strategy, right? Strategy, boosting and hedging and the moves, use of first person, right? Again, it's that a little bit of the top down, a little bit of the bottom up, right? Where the students get accustomed to going both directions, whether it's a bio statement or something else. Academic phraseology, pushing the genre boundaries, revealing personal information, maybe yes, maybe no. Interesting question. The use of hyperlinks so that the statement on what's on the page. Digital text allow us to do a lot of really creative things, right? So we can get across the basics of genres and moves and steps, even in something like a bio statement, which often we just don't think about as all that relevant, right? But those bios are a place where we can start to establish our identity. We can become familiar with moves and help students become familiar with moves and steps. And you don't need to be tech savvy to do any of this. I don't have a web page, and people may wonder why. You can email me later and I'll explain why. But in order to help students with these texts that ultimately could wind up on LinkedIn or a website elsewhere, departmental page, you just need to know about genre, right? The students themselves, they know the tech stuff, right? And if your students don't, you find a senior student who does, right? I always bring in a more senior student. Right? But there's a lot of possibilities here to work on academic writing with students without the need for them to have some research. We can teach about writing about content that's familiar to us ourselves, right? We can foster creativity, maybe using the student spotlight or something else. Learning to reach and learn to write for different audiences, right? Because it's not an expert necessarily who's going to read that bio, right? It may be a non-expert. And that's one of the toughest things for students, to know how to write to both audience. Find new ways of engaging in new ways of being a junior scholar, and help the students develop identities as teachers, professionals, right? And scholars, right? Not to forget about those students that might not have that research that's really more reserved for those in an academically oriented program. So I'm going to stop at this point because I'm probably way over time, and I apologize for that. Yeah, final words on this, right? Let's broaden our thoughts on what we can be teaching in our academic writing classes. And what I've just shown you, all those genres, make a really, really cool class that we're going to develop and have on our books in fall 2022. And I'm hoping I'm the one that gets to teach it. I'm really excited.
Thank you very much for that very insightful talk, Christine. And thank you also for translating the theories and research works into practice, which is very much significant to make research reach the impact it hopes, particularly in this writing. Also, I particularly like how writing classes should adapt with the writing needs of the industry, which highlights the other genres besides writing a research article. And let me re-emphasize how understanding and discussing different genres open avenues for teachers to really equip students with the diverse writing demands across disciplines and practices. And thank you for putting it up in a very, very beautiful way. And at this point, I think we're ready for our last, but definitely not the last speaker, who will talk about, and this is very much relatable to all students doing their graduate studies. Our last speaker is an assistant teaching professor of writing in the graduate school at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. In this role, she teaches writing classes to matriculated graduate students and develops and delivers programming for doctoral writers. Her current research focuses on doctoral students' experiences in the dissertation process, especially factors that impede dissertation writing progress and interventions that help writers succeed. Her most recent work on this topic has been published in the Journal of Second Language Writing in 2019 and the edited volume of Learning from the Lived Experiences of Graduate Students Writers just last year. Everyone, let us welcome Dr. Lisa Russell-Pinson.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, especially among such esteemed company. Just bear with me for a moment while I share my screen. So this is going to be slightly different from what BB and Chris has just talked to us about. I want to just start off by saying that I'm so delighted to be at the end of this, because I was able to listen to them and to think about the kinds of things that I do in my own classroom, because like BB and Chris, my own orientation to writing is genre based. And I want to just mention one thing that I learned from Chris a couple of years ago. She gave an excellent presentation at the Consortium on Graduate Communication in 2018, which was held at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And based on that conversation that she and John Swales had, I started introducing a number of alternative academic text within my own practice. And I've been using that successfully for the past few years. And I don't think that if I had not heard her speak about this, I would have taken that initiative to incorporate that into my curriculum. So it's a foundational part, genre is, for my teaching. But I'm going to depart from that a bit now, because I really want to focus on the processes that writers bring to any kind of academic text production. And so I'm going to be talking about resiliency in academic writing. And in particular, I'm going to be looking at effective factors that can help or perhaps hinder academic writers. And a lot of the research that I'm going to be drawing on today is taken from a Western context. So I want to mention that up front, because I've never taught, unfortunately, I've never been able to teach in Asia before. So I don't know the extent to which this may apply to different contexts in the East. But because we're all humans and we all have emotions, I believe that some of this may be valuable to you as academic writers, whether you are a student or whether you're a professional. So with that, I'd like to begin just by introducing the three main topics of the talk today. First, we're going to look at a few academic effective factors in academic writing, including why we're looking at this at all. Then we're going to look at some of the detrimental impacts of negative effective factors. And these are limited to procrastination, perfectionism, and stress among academic writers. And then we're going to talk about some strategies that writers can use to become more resilient within the process. So before I get started, in the chat, I'd like for you to share an adjective that describes how you're feeling right now. And it can be positive, or it can be negative, or it can be neutral. But I just ask that you consider how you're feeling and enter that adjective into the chat. Great adjectives so far. Great. Wonderful. So while the rest of you are entering in your adjectives, I just want to mention why I'm doing this. Many times when I'm working with writers, particularly in my classes, I will start off with this just so we can kind of have some commonality, which has been very important when we are thinking about trying to build community within an online space. I also do this with my dissertation writing groups, and I check in with them throughout the group, and I take their temperature, their emotional temperature before they start writing and after they write. And we look at the difference in adjectives that they are displaying during that time. And it's very interesting because many times they find that even if they are coming into the dissertation writing group frustrated or tired, sometimes they may feel refreshed or they may feel excited because they have done something productive during our time together. And it's really useful for them to connect that feeling to that productivity that they've just experienced. So I wanted you to have an opportunity to take part in that as well. So let's talk a little bit about the affective factors in academic writing. So I want to start off by mentioning some research by Driscoll and Wells. They were writing about writing centers, which we have in the United States at most major universities and colleges. And their article really focuses on the importance of attending to the whole writer when they are working with writers within the writing center, because writing center spaces are a place of connection. And if we don't acknowledge the emotional parts of writing when we are working with students, we're not going to be able to help them produce their best writing. And so I want to highlight two things that they mention in their article. One is that they know that emotions are really important in shaping the writing processes, product and transfer and development of that writer. And also, when we have a holistic approach to writing, we acknowledge those things that I just mentioned, as well as we can attend to other things that are going on, perhaps situationally or perhaps globally. For example, the current pandemic, which at least in my context has caused a tremendous amount of stress among the graduate students that I work with, as they face research that they have not been able to conduct because they have not been able to do the kind of human subjects research that they had anticipated. So their research has had to change abruptly. They have faced funding challenges because of the pandemic and the need to continue with their research beyond the point where they thought that they were going to be able to finish by. They've dealt with childcare challenges as K-12 schools have shut down during the pandemic. They've dealt with so many different issues during this time. So it's important to think about how these things may not just impact them personally, but also impact their academic trajectory and degree completion. And writing is a very big part of that, as we know, for graduate students. So as I mentioned before, there are so many circumstances that graduate writers face during their degree programs. Some of them may be very positive, and I hope that for everyone here who may be a graduate student or who has gone through graduate school, this has been your entire trajectory, your entire path has been positive. But we also know, especially from our own experiences perhaps, and also from the literature, that there are things that can negatively impact academic writers. And so I have two examples here for you. And so we know that in a US context, many times financial security is directly linked to being a positive circumstance for academic writers, their ability to have the funding that they need in order to see them through their own academic program. We also know that when students experience poor relationships with their advisors or mentors, that is a very negative impact that academic writers can have. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get some of your ideas about the positive and negative impacts that you have seen or perhaps have even experienced in academic writing yourself. So I'm going to put this into the chat. See if I can do this. And this is a Jamboard, and I'm going to ask you to take just a few minutes to access this link on the Jamboard and to add some notes about what you think are some circumstances that can positively or negatively impact writers, either from your own experiences as faculty members, your own experiences as writers, or as graduate students. So please take a moment to think about that and to add some ideas to the Jamboard. Okay, thank you so much for participating with that. And a number of the items that you have just mentioned are things that we also see in the literature about the positive and negative impact on academic writers. So let's take a brief look at that. So in terms of favorable conditions, one of the most studied ones is about advisors and mentors. So having supportive advisors and mentors is really key to success in graduate school. Stable personal relationships, not only with a partner, but also with perhaps parents or other relatives, other friends in your cohort, etc. Financial security, especially for those in the United States, is really essential to well-being in graduate school. Good physical and mental health. Self-efficacy, which we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation. But that's also something that when students are feeling self-efficacious, they are more likely to persist. Having a strong community of others who are going through the similar experience as you also is another favorable condition that helps students to persist within the process. And then other things that we'll mention too a bit later, things like a growth mindset, believing that people can achieve things, that it's not just talent, but students are able to learn and to grow throughout a process is very important. Now, the literature has mostly focused on struggles that graduate students have faced during this process. And again, these are more, these studies that are below are more along the lines of studies that have looked at the experiences of doctoral writers rather than master's level students. But I think that many of these apply to master's level students as well. Writing difficulties, we typically think of that as something that is really important and something for writing instructors to address. But I also would ask that for those of us who are writing professionals to think more broadly about the kinds of concerns that writers bring to the process of composition, because what happens is when a writer has a struggle or is facing a difficulty and their mind is on that struggle or difficulty, they are less likely to persist in the process, they are less likely to make the kind of gains with their writing to absorb the content of their disciplinary subject matter compared to their other counterparts who do have the kinds of favorable conditions we just talked about. So even though we may not be able to, for example, address existing health and mental health issues, we should still be cognizant of that and help redirect students to resources that can help them in that manner. So what we know from the literature, and I'm sure that some of you may also know this from seeing other graduate students experience some of these struggles, is that sometimes these struggles will result in a negative impact for the writers. And we see this commonly. We can find isolation, we can find depression, we can find imposter phenomenon, but I want to focus on these three factors, procrastination, perfectionism, and stress, because these are three of the most common ones. And these are ones that as writing professionals, we can really help students address in a meaningful way as well. And I think that students, if they recognize this, can also help themselves. So let's move on to focus on each one of these in turn. So when I'm talking about procrastination, I take this definition from Krauss and Freund, that procrastination is the delay of the initiation or completion of a goal to the point of discomfort. Now, I don't know how many of you have found yourself procrastinating about a writing project before, but I can tell you that I have procrastinated. I'm particularly a very proficient procrastinator when it comes to the initiation of a project. I'm really good after I start and get momentum. I can finish a project very easily, usually, but it's that starting that is really, really hard for me. Okay, so I'd like for us to take just a moment in the chat and to share some reasons why you think academic writers might procrastinate. Some of you may not procrastinate or have never procrastinated with an academic writing project, but you've probably known of someone who has. And I want you just to reflect on that experience and to think why they might procrastinate. So if you could please enter that in the chat when you have an opportunity. Okay. I see some common ones here. Okay. Great, great ideas. Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful feedback here. Okay. Yes. Okay. Great ideas. Please keep those coming. I'm going to continue on and talk a little bit more about procrastination. So what we know from the literature on academic writers, and I saw that someone had commented that people are lazy, but what we know about graduate students and their procrastination around academic tasks in general and academic writing in particular is that laziness rarely is a factor here. And so what we find in the literature is that it can be caused by a number of different things. So many times writers will not begin a project because they don't want to face what outcome might be waiting for them. For example, if they feel that they're going to be criticized for the content of their writing or their writing in general, they'll say, oh, it's just easier for me not to do this now. I'm going to avoid this. So I don't have to face it. I don't have to face what this outcome might be. Other times we know from the literature too that there might be difficult relationships that writers have with an authority figure who is in charge of their writing. And that might be, for example, a dissertation advisor, or it might be someone who is a head of the lab and they're working on a group project and they may be procrastinating on that because it's something that's unpleasant. And many of you also mentioned this in the chat, that sometimes writers will avoid writing tasks because they're difficult, and maybe they just hate writing, or they think that they hate writing because it is difficult and they don't know how to begin. And then many times when writers don't have clear guidelines, or they don't have support or don't know how to access that support, they can also procrastinate in the process. So what we know is that when procrastination happens with writing, there are a number of deleterious effects that can occur. The quality of their work may not be very high, because one of the things that we know is when writers continuously engage with those ideas through writing, their writing and the depth of their ideas will improve, especially if they're getting feedback continuously and revising in that process. They're also susceptible to increased stress and poor health, including poor sleep. They often have a negative self-regard, and this might also have some challenges, present some challenges with their advisors or their mentors if their advisors or mentors are expecting them to produce by a certain period of time. And we also know that this may also affect their degree completion. At least in the United States, different universities have different timelines, but sometimes students can exceed a timeline and they may not be able to graduate because of that if they haven't shown sufficient progress. So the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is perfectionism. And I'm currently writing a book chapter on this in academic writers. And so this is how I've framed perfectionism in academic writing. It's when writers set unattainable goals and then become excessively self-critical when they fail to reach them. So the goals are so high that they're unattainable. And then even though a writer may have an excellent product, because they don't reach this level, they become very frustrated and feel like they can't do it. So I would ask in the chat, what might happen when writers have perfectionistic tendencies about their academic work? So please take a moment to reflect on that and let us know your thoughts about that in the chat. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those ideas. And for those of you who haven't had an opportunity, please continue to enter those. So one of the things we know about perfectionism, and many of you mentioned that, is that it can reduce writing productivity. It increases procrastination. And typically what we find in the psychology literature is that perfectionism and procrastination are flip sides of the same coin. And this is particularly the case for graduate students, because graduate students are typically very high achievers and are used to performing at a certain level. And so when this happens, that perfectionism can lead to procrastination. It slows down progress. And also, I saw a couple of you mention this, timely submission of work, which can be a problem, not only when you're looking at an academic degree, but also if, let's say, for example, you're responding to a call for papers. It can diminish writers' self-confidence and writers' self-regard, as you mentioned before, and it can be very demotivating. So all of this can lead to really poor mental health outcomes for those who have perfectionistic tendencies. It can lead to stress, depression, exhaustion, and burnout. And those of us who work with dissertation writers who are writing a very long stretch of text, doing a tremendous amount of research over a span of time, if they don't have the kind of resources that they need to draw on, we can see some of this coming through in their work and in their attitudes towards their work. So the last thing I want to mention here is stress. And stress is something that I'm sure all of you are aware of. I want to frame it here as something that can be either positive or negative, because really what it is, it's your response to a circumstance. And that response may be positive, that circumstance may be positive, or that circumstance may be negative. We tend to think of it only as negative, but it might be positive too. So for example, if you're planning a vacation, there is a certain amount of stress that might be involved in that, but it's a happy time versus other times when we might be facing stress of a high stakes exam, for example, that might be perceived as more of a negative stress. And so I just wanted to touch on this because this is something that's talked about in the psychology literature. We have the eustress as being like the optimal stress in order to be productive. So we know sometimes we need that push, okay, to help us actually function to the best of our productivity. But once it reaches a certain point, then our ability to function really declines. And that's, so we move from the eustress to the distress. And it's the distress that we commonly think of, at least in American culture, as being really what stress is. Okay, so that's really what I want to focus on here. So in the chat, I was wondering if you could share some common signs of distress that you have seen or experienced as an academic writer. Insomnia, yes, I have experienced that myself. Yes, hair loss, writer's block, yes. Yes, yes, binge watching, yes, I'm guilty of that myself. Exercising too much, yes. Yes, okay, avoidance strategies, yes. Headaches, okay, so I'm seeing behavioral, I'm seeing physical, I'm seeing cognitive difficulties. Okay, wonderful. These are just exactly what we're going to see on the next slide. I may not even need to present it because I'm seeing a lot of this here. Okay, eat more, eat less. Yes, I'm definitely of an eat more kind of person. Okay, so thank you all for mentioning that. Okay, shouting loudly, yes. So what I want to focus on here is there are really 4 major types of effects that distress can bring. Many of you mentioned things like physical symptoms, and then behavioral issues like avoidance, for example, and then the emotional issues like withdrawing from certain situations. I also want to mention the cognitive. Someone did mention concentration, but I think it's important for you to consider that concentration can be something that is linked to stress, rather than thinking that it's just the way that you are thinking and you're not able to process something because you can't. If the stress is lowered, you may be able to do that. So this is something that is really important to consider. So I want to move on to the last part, which is being resilient in the process. And so by resilience, what I'm referring to is the ability to bounce back when you are faced with a difficult circumstance. And so we know that the coping strategies that resilient people are able to employ include becoming connected with other people, also having a positive thinking strategy, and having very good health behaviors so that you are getting enough sleep, eating well, etc. And that you are flexible in the way that you're approaching different tasks. You don't think that it's just one way. And that what we know is that resilience in an academic context can really enhance academic performance as well as persistence within the academic process and degree completion. So I'd like for you to note, I don't think we're going to have time for this now that I'm looking at the time, but I'd just like for you to think about and perhaps enter in the chat some strategies that you can think of that might promote resilience in academic writers. I agree that social connectedness has been difficult. I've struggled with that myself. Exercise, diet, and sleep, excellent, yes. Forming a writing group, wonderful. All of these are great. Small goals, absolutely. Talking to your friends, meditating, wonderful. All of these are great ideas. And I'll just mention the last few of these as we finish up the presentation. So one of the things that we know about academic writers is that they build self-efficacy. And many of the things that both Bibi and Chris talked about tonight in terms of understanding genre and using genre in order to understand how to compose a text is a part of that self-efficacy. Writers also use the writing process effectively. They manage their responses to critical feedback. They develop a growth mindset, and they either join or create a writing community, as some of you have already mentioned, as well as attending to their physical and mental health. So just to give an idea of some of these, in terms of building self-efficacy, in addition to using the wonderful genre-based resources that both Bibi and Chris mentioned, is understanding where to find guidelines about the kinds of writing projects that you're doing. And also looking at model text, and this is where genre analysis can really play in and be a way of demystifying what these texts are doing and how you might be able to approach them as a writer. Seeking support when needed, and I always say to my writers before it becomes an issue, to know where those resources are. And one of the things that we know from a study by Robert Boyce on resiliency in academic writing is that writers anticipate problems that might come up within the creation of a piece of academic work. And before they start writing, they strategize ways to deal with that before they're an issue. And that's one of the things that I always ask my writers to do before they embark on a major project for my class. I ask them to anticipate and to think about what they're going to be doing for that. Using the writing process effectively. In the United States, many of us were taught that the writing process is linear. We go from pre-writing to drafting to revision to editing, and then we submit. But what we know is that the writing process is not linear, but recursive. And if you have this notion that it is recursive, then you're less likely to feel frustrated when you're asked to do revisions. And so in that same vein, thinking about this writing as more of a process-focused endeavor rather than on the product can help to reduce your stress. Keeping track of your progress and acknowledging that progress, no matter how small it is really key to keeping your motivation up. And in terms of developing good habits, I say plan your work and then work your plan. And one way of doing that is planning what you're going to be doing for your writing the night before, so you're not spending time trying to get back into a project. And along those lines, also leaving breadcrumbs. So when you finish a work cycle, you know where you're going in the next time because you have written down exactly where you left off and what you need to do next, so that when you come back there, you have those notes to yourself. Also, resisting editing while you are drafting is very important. We know this from a cognitive level. You're using two different skill sets of your brain when you're doing this. So you really want to channel the creativity when you're drafting and when you're revising. The editing can come at the end of that work cycle when you're really attending to low-level features. And then writing in the company of others through writing groups is also essential. Managing your responses to critical feedback is really important. And I'll just mention this middle part here because I think it's very important that as a writer, you are not defined by a piece of writing. And a rejection is not a failure. Everyone who submits a piece of writing subjects themselves to potential failure. And I will tell you, to potential rejection, excuse me. And I will tell you that just by submitting, you are succeeding because you are getting your work out there. You are getting additional feedback that's going to move you forward in the process. And that's really important to remember. It's also important to make sure that you have a way of moving forward with this feedback. So I recommend that you think about how you're going to triage the feedback and how that feedback is going to move you forward in the process by having a systematic way of approaching it. So I ask my students when they are submitting work to journals to set up something like this, where they have the comment from the reviewer, they have an action that's going to turn that comment into something they are going to specifically do to address that comment, and then to keep track of how they have done that. And this is something that is really useful in order for you to also write back your feedback to the reviewers as well as to the editor to show how you have addressed their feedback. And developing a growth mindset is really important, as I mentioned before, because this is something that can help you remember that you are a part of humanity, that everything that you are doing as a writer is something that other writers do, and that no one starts off writing a perfect draft the first time. And in fact, I tell my writers that there's no such thing as a perfect draft, and that that's a standard you shouldn't hold yourself to. But through this recursive process of getting feedback and revising, you can improve and you can grow as a writer, because it is something that everyone can learn the basic skills upon. And then last but not least, as many of you mentioned, creating a writing community is really important. So if there is not a writing group for you already on your campus, you can establish one within your department or within your program, and use this as a place to really get support for some of these emotional struggles that you might have in the composing process or in other aspects of your academic life. And then finally, remembering your physical health and your mental health are really going to be things that can see you through any kind of academic work that you're doing, including academic writing. So thank you so much again for listening and responding so wonderfully today to this talk. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa, for touching upon serious issues that really most graduate students experience and are actually deemed important in helping them in their academic journey. And I would like to give focus on perfectionism and resilience. I observe and feel as a graduate student myself how difficult it is to manage dissertation writing, and dismissing such difficulty might lead to demotivation and much worse, dropouts. So what you offered today is truly resonating, as it helps both advisors and students to manage the process of writing. And I want to repeat what you mentioned by saying plan your work and work your plan. And that's a very important message to get everyone really into the writing stage. And I would say that this session has been a holistic discussion of writing, from theoretical, methodological, and findings from writing research, understanding of different genres and their features, to the experience of writing. So thank you very much, Professor Budsaba, Christine, and Dr. Lisa, for such an insightful, engaging, and uplifting session. So at this point, I think we can still accommodate 1 or 2 questions from the audience, right? I think there was one question that Professor Budsaba answered.
Can you stop sharing the screen? Thank you. All right. So 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, so we can entertain maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Maybe just one. Pick one.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, let's have one. Let's have one question.
Since we are running out of time, so 1 might be enough, right?
Oh, we have 1 question. So I think this is directed to, and maybe everyone can offer their insights. What are the research implications of the resilience on academic writing? This is a little bit
Lisa.
broad, but Yes, perhaps Dr. Lisa would like to offer her insights.
I'd be glad to. My colleague Lynn Harris and I wrote an article that was published in 2019 about stress in the dissertation process among students who are multilingual. And one of the things that we talked about was the importance of resilience. And so I think one of the things that I would emphasize here is that resilience is really important for persistence, because regardless of whether you are a dissertation writer or you're a first-year faculty member, or perhaps you're a tenured faculty member, you are going to be facing challenges throughout your academic career and performance. And that ability to persist and to know that you are not alone in that process, I think is key. It's a question of connecting as I mentioned before, to our common humanity. And this is something that I get from my colleague, Lynn Harris, who is a clinical psychologist. We talk about how when you are a child, people love you. They love you unconditionally, even though you're not doing anything for them. They love you even though you cry, even though you may have a temper tantrum, they still love you. And you are that same person, even though you are an adult. And you deserve that same kind of acceptance and treatment regardless. And that is a part of resilience, is knowing that your fundamental nature as a person is valuable. So I think just trying to remember that during this process, when times are tough, when there's a tremendous amount of competition, to try to step back from that, I think is really important. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I did want to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you our speakers for this really insightful and very engaging session.